The Roman Empire did not end with its last emperor dying in a glorious battle. It ended with a boy losing his throne. For centuries, Roman emperors had commanded armies, conquered kingdoms, and ruled millions. Now the emperor could barely control his own palace. His name was Romulus Augustulus, and before his short reign was over, the Roman Empire in the West would have no emperor at all. Today, you can practice your English by listening to the true story of the young emperor who stood at the end of an age. It is a story about power, fear, soldiers, betrayal, and one question: how does the greatest empire in the world disappear? To understand Romulus, we must first understand something important. By the time he became emperor, Rome had already lost much of its power. The empire that once stretched across enormous lands was now divided between a stronger east and a much weaker west. Constantinople remained rich and powerful in the east. In the west, emperors struggled to find money, soldiers, and political control. Britain was gone. Much of Gaul and Spain was outside imperial control. North Africa, once extremely valuable, had also been lost. And without rich provinces, Rome collected less tax. With less money, it became harder to pay and maintain powerful armies. The Western Empire increasingly depended on soldiers from many peoples beyond Italy, serving inside the Roman military system. These warriors could defend an emperor, but when they stopped obeying him, they could also decide who sat on the throne. Rome itself was no longer the main Western imperial residence. The court had moved north to Ravenna, protected by marshes and strong defenses. Ravenna looked secure, but walls could not solve the deeper problems of the empire: weak government, military rivalry, and constant political change. Western emperors came and went with frightening speed. Powerful generals often controlled the real decisions, while emperors wore the purple. The title of emperor still sounded magnificent, but the title and the reality behind it were becoming very different things. Then, in 475, another powerful military commander appeared at the center of Western politics. His name was Orestes. And strangely, the man who would place Rome's final emperor on the throne had once served at the court of Attila the Hun. Orestes was a Roman from Pannonia. He survived a dangerous age by moving between powerful rulers, armies, and political alliances. Years after Attila's empire disappeared, Orestes rose inside the Roman world and became one of the most important military commanders in the West. The emperor at the time was Julius Nepos, a ruler supported by the Eastern Roman government in Constantinople. Nepos gave Orestes command of important troops. It was a dangerous decision because military power had become political power. Instead of remaining loyal, Orestes turned his army toward Ravenna. The emperor suddenly discovered that his own commander had become his enemy. Julius Nepos did not wait for the attack. He escaped across the Adriatic Sea to Dalmatia, but he did not surrender his imperial claim. Now, Orestes controlled the government. He had the army. He had Ravenna. He could have tried to become emperor himself. But Orestes chose another solution. He placed his young son on the throne and kept the real political power for himself. On October 31st, 475, Romulus was proclaimed emperor of the Western Roman Empire. He was still extremely young. His exact age is uncertain, but the surviving sources clearly present him as a youth, not as an experienced ruler. The contrast was extraordinary. A young boy now carried one of the most powerful titles ever created by the Roman world. And even his name seemed almost too perfect for history. Romulus Augustus, carrying the names of Rome's legendary founder and its first emperor. Later generations often called him Augustulus, meaning something like Little Augustus. The nickname made the young emperor seem even smaller. He wore imperial clothing. Coins carried his image. Officials used his name. But everyone understood where the real authority stood. Orestes commanded the army and directed the government. Romulus sat on the throne, but his father controlled the machine around him. There was another serious problem. The Eastern Emperor, Zeno, did not recognize Romulus as the legitimate emperor of the West. For Constantinople, Julius Nepos was still the rightful Western emperor, even though he was living across the sea in Dalmatia. So Romulus had a throne, a palace, and a title. But outside his father's territory, even his right to be emperor was questioned. Still, life in the imperial court continued. Documents were issued, ceremonies were performed. The old Roman system tried to keep moving. Perhaps that was the strangest part. An empire could be dying while people inside it continued their normal routines. But beyond the palace, thousands of soldiers were becoming angry. They had fought for Rome, and now they wanted something in return. These troops wanted land in Italy where they could settle. Similar arrangements had already appeared elsewhere in the Western Roman world. They brought their demand to Orestes, the man who depended on their weapons to keep his son on the throne. Orestes refused. It was the decision that would destroy his power, kill him, and remove his son from the imperial throne. The angry soldiers needed a leader. They found one in a military commander, whose name would become permanently connected with Rome's fall. His name was Odoacer. He was a Germanic military leader who had risen within the complicated world of the late Roman army. The soldiers chose Odoacer as their leader. Their dispute over land had now become an open rebellion against Orestes. Orestes had once used military force to remove Julius Nepos. Now the same kind of power was turning against him. Odoacer and his forces moved against Orestes. The Western government suddenly faced the most dangerous enemy possible, its own army. And back in Ravenna, the young emperor could do almost nothing. The soldiers were not fighting him. They were destroying the power behind him. Orestes tried to resist, but his position collapsed quickly. Odoacer's rebellion was stronger than the government he had created. In late August 476, Orestes was captured and killed. The man who had made his son emperor was suddenly gone. For Romulus, this was more than a political disaster. His father had controlled the army, the government, and probably most of his young life. Now, the boy emperor remained in Ravenna, while the army that had defeated his father moved toward the center of his power. There would be no great Roman rescue force. No distant legion was coming to save the last Western emperor. The empire that had once sent armies across continents could not protect the teenager sitting inside its own imperial capital. Odoacer entered the final stage of his victory. Romulus had almost no real power left with which to resist him. Imagine the palace now. Imperial banners, ancient titles, nervous officials, and at the center of everything, a very young emperor waiting. There was a crown on his head, but no army behind him. The symbols of power remained after the power itself had disappeared. On September 4th, 476, Odoacer removed Romulus Augustulus from the Western imperial throne. There was no new Western emperor waiting to replace him. This time, the throne would simply remain empty. After centuries of emperors in the West, the line ended not with a magnificent final battle, but with the removal of a boy. But Romulus now faced another question. Deposed emperors often had dangerous endings. Would Odoacer allow him to live? His father was already dead. The rebellion had won. Odoacer had little reason to fear the young emperor as a military rival. According to later accounts, Odoacer was moved by Romulus's youth and spared his life instead of ordering his execution. The boy who became famous as Rome's last Western emperor therefore survived the day on which his imperial career ended. He had ruled for only about 10 months. It was a tiny reign at the end of an empire with centuries of history. But the most important decision was not what Odoacer did to Romulus. It was what he decided not to do next. Odoacer did not place another puppet emperor on the throne. He chose to rule Italy without creating a new Western Augustus. The imperial symbols of the West were sent toward Constantinople, where Emperor Zeno ruled the surviving eastern half of the Roman Empire. The message was powerful. Italy no longer needed a separate emperor. One Roman emperor in Constantinople could be enough. Odoacer became ruler of Italy, commonly remembered as its first king after the end of the Western imperial government. Yet something surprising happened. Italy did not suddenly forget Roman law, Roman administration, or the Roman Senate. For ordinary people, September 4th may not have felt like the day the ancient world suddenly ended. Much of daily life continued. This is why historians must be careful with the famous date 476. It is important, but history rarely changes in a single afternoon. The political office of Western Emperor had disappeared from Italy, but Roman society did not vanish with Romulus's crown. And there was an even stranger problem with calling Romulus the unquestioned last Western emperor. Remember Julius Nepos, the emperor who escaped from Ravenna? He was still alive in Dalmatia when Romulus was removed. More importantly, the Eastern Roman government still considered Nepos the legitimate Western emperor rather than recognizing Romulus. Nepos continued claiming the title until his death in 480. So, was Romulus truly the last emperor? The answer depends on what "last" means. Romulus is remembered as the final emperor because he was the last man to actually occupy the Western imperial throne in Italy. But after losing that throne, the young man almost disappears from history. And this is where his story becomes strangely quiet. Odoacer sent him south to Campania, far from the political center where he had briefly worn the imperial purple. Some accounts say he was given a generous yearly payment. Whatever the exact arrangement, his life was spared and his political career was finished. Think about that change. One year he was called Augustus. Soon afterward, he was simply a young man living away from power. And then the historical record becomes uncertain. We do not know exactly when Romulus died or what he thought about his extraordinary fate. Later evidence may suggest that a man named Romulus was still receiving money decades later, but his identity cannot be proven with certainty. The boy connected forever with the fall of Rome may have lived quietly for years after the empire he represented disappeared in the West. History remembers conquerors because of the lands they gained. Romulus is remembered for something very different: what disappeared around him. He did not destroy the Roman Empire. He inherited its final weakness, wore its greatest title, and became the face of its Western ending. But Rome itself did not disappear. Its language, laws, religion, institutions, roads, cities, and memories continued shaping the world after 476. And the Roman Empire was not completely gone either. In Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire continued for almost another 1,000 years. So the fall of Rome was not one explosion. It was a long transformation, filled with lost provinces, political struggles, new rulers, and changing identities. Yet symbols matter, and an empty imperial throne in Italy was a symbol that the Western Roman world had entered something new. A strange coincidence made the story almost poetic. Rome began in legend with a Romulus, and the final Western emperor was also named Romulus. The first Augustus had ruled an empire entering its greatest age. The last young Augustus ruled while that Western empire was disappearing. Romulus Augustulus was not Rome's destroyer. He was something more tragic, a child wearing the crown of a world that could no longer support it. Empires can survive for centuries, but when their foundations disappear, sometimes all that remains is a title, a memory, and an empty throne.